Howdy, y'all. Welcome back. Thank you so much for being here. Would you believe me if I told you that the United States of America has been researching the idea of remote viewing since as early as the 1930s, and this idea of remote viewing was fully fleshed out by the 1970s and used in relative secrecy until 1995 before documents regarding remote viewing were fully declassified in the year 2000. That is what we are going to look into today. Those declassified documents and a little bit of history regarding remote viewing in the United States of America. Throughout my research, I've often come across major topics that require a certain amount of nuance when discussing. Today is no different. We will look at declassified documents from the United States Defense Intelligence Agency outlining their multitude of programs related to the concept of remote viewing. According to the DIA definition, remote viewing is the acquisition and description by mental means of information blocked from ordinary perception by distance, shielding, and time. Remote viewing falls under the larger classification of psychoenergetics, defined as psychokinesis, or the ability to perform physical actions using only mental powers, as well as ESP, telepathy, and remote viewing, with these last three being further defined as perceptions which cannot be explained by known sensory means. The Defense Intelligence Agency was not the first in American history to research this phenomenon, and the origin of psychoenergetic research can be tied back to the published reports of 1970 at the Stanford Research Institute, the brainchild of laser physicists Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. A quick dive into these gentlemen shows that Hal Puthoff was born in Chicago in 1936 before graduating with an engineering degree from the University of Florida. He then moved to Stanford, where he graduated in 1967 with a thesis on lasers that evolved to include electron beam devices. He published The Fundamentals of Quantum Electronics in 1969. His research into this quantum physics led him in the direction of Scientology, where Hal Puthoff reached the top level of Scientology by early 1971. Puthoff was one of the first Scientologists to openly discuss aspects of its secret practices, and he claimed by reaching the highest level, he also achieved a level of exteriorization, a form of remote viewing that's quintessential to Scientology belief. Following his so-called enlightenment, Hal connected with his alma mater to conduct the first documented scientific experiments into the capabilities of remote viewing, which is associated with Russell Targ, and he deemed this to be a form of paranormal activity. The Stanford Research Institute remote viewing program became known as the STARGATE program, or GATE for short. More on that soon. But following positive test results of the STARGATE project, Hal Puthoff then financed and funded the Institute for Advanced Studies, Austin, Texas, later renamed Earth Tech International in 1991. The purpose of this company was to bring forth alternate forms of energy and research free energy systems. In 1998, Hal Puthoff and Earth Tech were granted their first patent for a system that could transmit information over long distances without using electricity or even magnetic field components. The system was said to be powered by a modulated potential alone, and according to peer reviews, and I quote, "The invention does appear to rest on solid, albeit somewhat obscure, physics principles," end quote. Hal further discussed free energy using a model he created which extrapolated on the ideas of Andrei Sakharov from 1968. Essentially, this model proposes that inertia is an electromagnetic drag force applied to all accelerating particles as produced by the interaction of the zero-point field, with gravity actually being a result of a reaction of zero-point fluctuations in this proverbial vacuum of space. Hal Puthoff then proceeded to fund research into UFOs, which he began in 2010 and continues to this day at the age of 88. He co-founded the UFO Disclosure and Development Company To the Stars with Blink-182 frontman Tom DeLonge. It seems like Hal has all the credentials, to say the least. So tying this back to remote viewing research, we actually have numerous individuals who dabbled into remote viewing research but rarely published their findings, even if their findings affirmed the existence of psychically gifted individuals. Here's a nice tidbit to take with a grain of salt. The first major scientist whose papers have resurfaced conducting research on remote viewing was Michael Faraday, the same man who was credited with pioneering electromagnetism and electricity. We also have research into remote viewing by Alfred Russel Wallace, who is credited with conceiving the concept of evolution through natural selection, which Charles Darwin expanded upon. Next, we have the leading scientist in hypnotherapy and hypnosciences, Rufus Osgood Mason, who served New York as the pioneer of hypnotherapy while also conducting intensive research into remote viewing. Lastly mentioned is Sir William Crookes, who is credited with inventing the Crookes vacuum tube in 1875, which entirely changed the fields of physics and chemistry forever. Crookes was also a leading paranormal researcher focused on remote viewing. It wasn't until Duke University professor Joseph Banks Rhine continued this research into remote viewing in the 1930s, conducting thorough tests on his students, that intrigue into the possibility of the paranormal began to come to the attention of the world governments. With the spiritual awakening of the 1960s came the societal acceptance of what was deemed to be the New Age and the possibility of highly advanced, gifted individuals existing amongst the public. However, the research at the Stanford Research Institute by Hal Puthoff was initially only possible with funding by the Parapsychology Foundation of Ohio, founded by Eileen Garrett and Frances Payne Bolton. To add credibility to these claims of remote viewing, Frances Payne Bolton was actually the first female representative in Congress in the state of Ohio's history. This Parapsychology Foundation was once a massive network of believers and actually owned the conference center in St. Paul de Vence, France, for many years, where they conducted secretive conferences for the leading minds in remote viewing research from across the earth. The Stanford Research Institute also had funding directly from the Institute of Noetic Sciences, formed in the early 1970s by Paul Temple and the famous astronaut, the sixth man to walk on the moon, Edgar Mitchell. Again, do you see how these aren't conspiracy theorists or uneducated minds who believed in the paranormal and were working to prove its existence and viability? The government reported that individuals who possessed remote viewing and other paranormal abilities were, quote, gifted, and further funded the studying of the abilities of Pat Price, Ingo Swann, and many others. Using the two individuals just named, according to these declassified documents, information was provided regarding top secret operations, the exact nature of which is still redacted. However, researchers claim both Price and Swann identified information they could not have possibly known beforehand by using remote viewing, and it was done with pinpoint accuracy. In the same DIA document, it is claimed that these individuals were further tested by HUMINT and the National Technical Sources, both of which confirmed their abilities. Part of the redacted information appears to be in regards to a Soviet research and development facility, which was also conducting similar experiments into remote viewing. As the test subjects excelled in remote viewing, this was chosen over other abilities like telepathy, telekinesis, and ESP as the focus for the secret government program moving forward. We're told hundreds of secret tests in remote viewing were conducted during the 1970s, including the 1972 test ordered by the Army Surgeon General in operation with the Medical Intelligence Information Agency and the DIA, which resulted in intense studies of the Soviet work into psychoenergetics. The Missile Intelligence Agency of the DIA then sought to replicate these tests in 1976. In what appears to be a cycle, massive funding was then awarded to the Stanford Research Institute in a contract to continue the replication of the Soviet tests on remote viewing. At the same time, in 1977, funding was also given by the Army Material Systems Analysis Agency to continue developing remote viewing techniques. Even more secretive funding was applied with the founding of the Gondola Wish program, under orders of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Human Intelligence. The Gondola Wish program, also known as Project Gondola Wish, was created to integrate the Soviet and Eastern psychoenergetic intelligence collection threat into the all-source of United States operations. This research occurred at Fort Meade, Maryland. By 1978, less than 1 year later, the Army concluded that remote viewing was 1. Warranted, 2. Necessary, and 3. Must be kept secretive. At that time, the Gondola Wish program was terminated and classified to the highest ranks on a need-to-know basis. However, more realistically, the Gondola Wish program was reclassified and renamed as Project Grill Flame. Project Grill Flame was the government's first official, albeit top-secret, remote viewing program, also stationed in the basement of Fort Meade, Maryland. Used solely for the collection of information through remote viewing techniques. We're told personnel, meaning the gifted individuals, as well as those administering and studying the sessions, were selected and training began by the spring of 1978. The first mission of Project Grill Flame took place on September 4th, 1979, and was tasked with locating a missing Navy aircraft which had lost communications before crashing. The chosen remote viewer was able to locate the crashed aircraft within 15 miles of where it had come to rest. Based on these results, Project Grill Flame was deemed to be a success against operational targets and was committed to full operations by December of 1979. Now, within this declassified document, which was only declassified in the year 2000, we're told sometime shortly before December of 1979, another incident occurred, but the entire incident is redacted from this document. Whatever it was, it caused the need for an independent investigative committee to be formed to review remote viewing activities in the American forces. This group was known as the Gil Committee. The Gil Committee concluded in their report to end the year 1979 that the United States needed to continue its operational remote viewing activities to determine the value of the intel collected. They needed to follow all psychoenergetic threats from foreign sources and put an end to them, and they needed to establish a Department of Defense authority to fund and monitor remote viewing access across the earth. However, just 3 months later, on March 5th, 1980, Dr. William Perry initiated the Perry Memorandum, which officially ceased all funding for psychoenergetic activities, with little explanation on the record for the reason of this action. According to this declassified document, research halted until February of 1981, when the entirety of Project Grill Flame was amalgamated into a joint program ran by the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Army, which lasted for 3 years. In such, the DIA became in charge of identifying the authenticity of information founded through remote viewing and how to respond, while the Army itself was in charge of locating and training gifted individuals, as well as conducting the remote viewing sessions. Project Grill Flame was contracted by multiple other facets of the government to conduct remote viewing sessions, including the Secretary of the Army, the Army General Counsel, the Assistant Surgeon General, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, the NSA, the CIA, the Navy, and at least 2 more major redacted organizations who had contracts working on remote viewing. However, By December of 1982, all remote viewing activities by the U.S. government were ordered ceased by a Senate subcommittee, who deemed the remote viewing program to be vastly overfunded. The committee did, however, allow the remote viewing program, Project Grill Flame, to conclude its research. When Project Grill Flame was allowed to flame out, excuse my pun, almost instantaneously, this research was picked up and continued by another governmental organization. This formed the basis for the Center Lane Project, funded by the Clandestine Security and Investigative Activities Organization. The Center Lane Project's approval thus reversed the Perry Memorandum, and funding was again allowed to flow into the remote viewing program. Behind the scenes, it appears there was an everlasting battle over what to do with gifted individuals, whom when tasked, could discover nearly any information on our Earth. This brings me to another document also released or declassified in the year 2000 that details one of the most highly classified remote viewing sessions in American military history. The subject, identified only as remote viewer number 32, identified and located the Ark of the Covenant without having any idea that is what they were looking for or looking at. We're told remote viewer number 32 was simply given the area of the Middle East in a form of viewing known as CRV, or coordinated remote viewing, where the subject is given a broad location or set of coordinates. From here, the remote viewer identified an item, never knowing what they saw was the Ark of the Covenant. However, this was later determined to be the case by the United States government, who reviewed the session. What's remarkable is this was never made mainstream news. This was highly classified until the year 2000, yet this occurred in 1988. And the declassified document does not tell us what action was taken following this remote viewing session. The official declassified report states, and I quote, "Target is a container. This container has another container inside of it. The target is fashioned of wood, gold, and silver. The target is similar in shape to a coffin and is decorated with seraphim. This target is located somewhere in the Middle East, as the language spoken by individuals present seemed to be Arabic. Visuals of surrounding buildings indicated the presence of mosque domes. Individuals in the area are clothed in virtually all white. They had black hair and dark eyes. One figure I honed in on wore a mustache. The target is well hidden, far underground, dark, and wet were all aspects of the location of the target. The purpose of the target is to bring all people together. It has something to do with ceremony, memory, homage, and the resurrection. There is an aspect of spirituality, information, lessons, and knowledge far beyond what we know. The target is protected by entities and can only be opened by those who are authorized to do so. This container cannot and will not be opened until the time is deemed correct. Once it is time to open the container, the mechanics of the lock system will be found to be fairly simple. Individuals opening the container by prying or striking are destroyed by the container's protectors through the use of a power that is still unknown to us." End quote. The session was said to have lasted 1 hour and 30 minutes. The remote viewing project, titled Project Center Lane, became a direct subsidiary of the Defense Intelligence Agency in 1985, as Congress was briefed on over 10 years of research before Project Center Lane regained full funding in 1986. By 1988, the time of the Ark of the Covenant remote viewing session, Project Center Lane became known as Project Sunstreak. The remainder of the declassified document, which appears to date from no later than 1990, as we have no mention of that decade or beyond, this document proceeds to end by detailing the purpose and positives surrounding the Project Sunstreak, which at the time that this document was conceived was still ongoing. We're told the remote viewing Project Sunstreak was also located at Fort Meade, Maryland, continuing in the footsteps of the first remote viewing programs. Project Sunstreak advanced remote viewing to its apex, and remote viewing was considered superior to other intelligence gathering methods, as remote viewing, in all documented instances, could not be traced and did not cost. Essentially, you can witness something happen, read something or hear something secretive, or view entire meetings and operations from a distance without ever leaving evidence of having done so. Remote viewing was deemed to be passive intelligence and was further celebrated as there was no known defense against it, meaning all of America's enemies were vulnerable, but in return, meaning all of America was vulnerable as well. By the end of the document, roughly 1990, remote viewing had become so advanced it was categorized into 7 main tasks. Number 1 was the penetration of inaccessible targets. Number 2 was the gathering of scientific and technological information. Number 3 was the cueing of other intelligence systems. Number 4 was the quelling of imminent hostilities. Number 5 was determining nuclear from non-nuclear targets. Number 6 was human source and character assessments, which goes hand in hand with number 7, which was accurate personality profiles of targets. Following these declassified documents of roughly 1990, we're told in the mainstream that Project Sunstreak and the Remote Viewing Program of America was brought into question by the Military Intelligence Board, headed by Harry E. Soyster, who deemed remote viewing, Project Sunstreak, and the entire STARGATE program to be unnecessary and a money drain on the American people. Funding was all but lost by 1994, and the program was phased out. However, in 1995, what remained of Project Sunstreak was transferred from the Defense Intelligence Agency to the CIA. The CIA hired a team of outside consultants to review the decades of research into remote viewing. The consultants found that gifted individuals chosen for remote viewing were roughly 20% more accurate at prediction than their non-gifted counterparts, with some individuals being upwards of 30 to 40% more accurate. However, in 1995, the $20 million remote viewing contract was ended, and the history of remote viewing was all but covered up until roughly the year 2000, when these handful of documents began to become declassified.